I thought it would be good to do a fresh video recording of the talk that I gave to Colchester Foodbank AGM last week, and which has been reported more recently in the local press. This is the talk. I think it's fair to say that 2020 has not turned out the way any of us imagined. We're in the grips of a pandemic that has claimed 42,000 lives in this country. Antarctica is melting. The west coast of America is on fire. It is a disaster of a year. But not only has the unexpected happened, but some things for which we longed, some things for which we hoped, have failed to materialise. And for me, top of the list of disappointments is that 2020, this year, was supposed to be the year that we ended child poverty in the UK. Back in March 1999, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair said, "Our historic aim will be for ours to be the first generation to end child poverty. Poverty should not be a birthright. Being poor should not be a life sentence," he said. "We need to break the cycle of disadvantage so that children born into poverty are not condemned to social exclusion and deprivation." The government launched the New Deal for lone parents and introduced the minimum wage. Financial support was made available in the form of tax credits, increases to child benefit and help with childcare costs, and they invested in support services like Sure Start. As a result, child poverty began to fall. In fact, 1 million children were lifted out of poverty. Levels of debt and deprivation fell, and child well-being was improved. Then, in 2010, the Child Poverty Act was passed, with support across all political parties. The 2010 Child Poverty Act set binding child poverty reduction targets and placed a legal duty on the government to prepare and report on progress against a child poverty strategy. And the Child Poverty Commission was formed. And this was the year in which this work was to reach its climax. You look at the graphs from back then and they will show that the reduction in child poverty, we were on target, we were going to do this. But then austerity hit. In 2015, Work and Pensions Secretary Ian Duncan Smith said that the pledge to end child poverty was unsustainable, and a further £12 billion worth of cuts were made to the social security budget. The UK Children's Commissioner's report at the time said the best interests of children were not central to the development of these policies, and they spoke of the reductions to household income for poorer children leading to food and fuel poverty, and the sharply increased use of crisis food bank provision by families. Despite our current Prime Minister falsely claiming that child poverty has fallen, the reality is that the number of children in poverty has risen by 600,000 since 2010. 4.2 million youngsters in the UK, or 30%, are existing below the poverty line. That's 9 children in a class of 30. The government's own Social Mobility Commission is now forecasting a further huge rise to 5.2 million children in poverty by 2022. Remember, this was the year in which child poverty was to have been ended in the UK. Instead, in 2020, 100,000 children make do without 3 square meals a day, or a warm winter coat. 400,000 children go without a daily portion of fresh fruit or vegetables. 3.2 million children go without even just a week's holiday a year. David Cameron spoke about life chances. Theresa May talked about burning injustices. And Boris Johnson announced that we would be united and levelled up. But we're still waiting for a strategy that will address the rising child poverty in this country. Meanwhile, 14-year-old Emmanuel doesn't have anything to eat during the school day. He says this: "Sometimes you don't have enough energy. You cannot cope in the classroom. So you have to try and rest a bit. You just put your head on the table and you end up falling asleep in the classroom and you get in trouble for it." And Shania's mother speaks for so many parents when she says, "Last week I didn't even eat for 4 days. And I have to lie to my kids and tell them that I've eaten so that they're okay, because as long as my kids are eating, then I'm okay." The social reformer Maud Pember-Reeves said over 100 years ago, it is to the collective interest of a nation that its children should flourish. She said there should be no such thing as an underfed schoolchild. An underfed child is a disgrace and a danger to the state. Nelson Mandela said, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Of course, there are, thank God, some soulful people out there. Like Marcus Rashford, who spoke of meeting a mother who, along with her 2 young sons, is currently living off 3 slices of bread a day, soaking them in hot water and adding sugar, hoping that the porridge consistency might better sustain the hunger of her 1-year-old child. This, he said, is the true reality of England in 2020. And of course, Colchester Foodbank, this amazing life-saving organisation. Research published last week by the Trussell Trust said that food banks are forecast to give out 6 emergency food parcels a minute this winter. That represents a 61% rise in need. At the start of this pandemic, around half of the people who had used a food bank had never needed one before. And guess what? Families with children have been the hardest hit. All this in the year that child poverty was supposed to have been ended. And with mass unemployment predicted on a scale not seen since the early 90s, the research points to a further 670,000 people being classed as destitute by the end of 2020, meaning they cannot afford essentials like housing, energy, and food. But it does not have to be this way. Back in the summer of 2018, I dared to offer the government some advice on universal credit. The press described it as a stinging attack on the government. But I genuinely wanted to offer some suggestions as to things the government could do to repair some of the gaping holes in the fraying safety net of our benefit system. And I want to do that again. And sadly, the first thing is really a repeat of something I said back then. We need to get rid of the benefit cap and the 2-child limit. As the furlough scheme comes to an end and unemployment rises, more and more people will be in receipt of universal credit. But they will soon discover that there is no support in universal credit for a 3rd or 4th child if that child currently is less than 3.5 years old. You see, the government's rationale was that parents claiming universal credit should be made to weigh up whether they can afford a 3rd or 4th child. As if 3 or 4 years ago, those who are newly being unemployed could have predicted a pandemic like this. It makes no sense. In the same way, the benefit cap, which limits the total amount of benefits per household, has no place during this current crisis. My own organisation, the Church of England, together with Child Poverty Action Group, have said in their joint report, the pandemic has exposed the benefit cap and the 2-child limit as inherently arbitrary, when what is needed during the pandemic and beyond is a safety net that is strong, compassionate and just. Families affected by the benefit cap are being driven into poverty with little way of remedying their situation, as working more or moving into cheaper housing, the 2 ways to escape the cap, are much more difficult as a result of the pandemic. The 2-child limit and the benefit cap must be ended now. Secondly, increase children's benefits. If you want to lift children out of poverty, then that is the easiest and most obvious way to do it. Child benefits should be increased by at least £10 a week. It is the best way to get money to families quickly, and it makes use of the existing tried and tested infrastructure. £10 a week should also be added to the universal credit child element and child tax credit, just to give that extra boost to those families on the very lowest incomes. It is not right that in 2020, the year that child poverty was supposed to have been ended, we are seeing more and more families and children trying to live on less than they need. And you know, for a chancellor who drinks from a reusable coffee cup that costs £160, a £20 increase in benefits can't seem too expensive, can it? Or is it the case that we are content to live in a country where those who have much can have too much, and those who have little must make do with too little to live on, too little to survive? And thirdly, and I'm with Marcus Rashford on this, we need to expand the eligibility for free school meals. Free school meals should be provided for all families who are in receipt of universal credit or tax credits. And maybe, in the longer term, the government should introduce universal free school meals for all school-aged children, starting with primary school children. So much good could be achieved if all this was what we did. Now, don't get me wrong. These three things by themselves are not going to bring an end to child poverty, but they will provide a lifeline to those most in need. Just as this godsend of an organisation, Colchester Foodbank, provides a lifeline to those who have come to an end of themselves. Each of these three things that I mention is ending the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, increasing child benefit and the universal credit child element and the child tax credit, and extending free school meal provision. Every one of these things is the subject of an online petition. All kinds of organisations, from the church to charities to trades unions like Unison, all kinds of people are saying the same thing. It is time to do something, not as an act of charity, but as a matter of justice. I thank God for this lifeline that is Colchester Foodbank, and I thank God for those who put food in collection boxes in supermarkets and give money towards the costs of providing this service. But I dream of a day when it is no longer needed. I dream of a day when the Foodbank AGM has to talk about downsizing and reducing the hours that the staff have to work. When Foodbank collection points do not appear on supermarket sweep as if this is some kind of permanent feature now in all supermarkets. I dream of a day when those who have much do not have too much, and those who have little do not have too little. I dream of a day when we finally break the cycle of disadvantage, so that children born into poverty are not condemned to social exclusion and deprivation. I dream of a day when child poverty is ended. And I'm heartbroken, genuinely heartbroken, that in 2020 we failed to see that day arrive. But then I think it's fair to say that 2020 has not turned out the way that any of us imagined. Thank you.